There is more light on the altar that I'm in my household tonight, and perhaps you've been lighting candles as well. Lighting candles can bring us some solace and a sense of that we are not alone, that we are surrounded by God's holy light in our lives. Joy can be elusive in the lead up to Christmas. Grief has a way of showing up in our lives when we don't expect it. And sometimes it can descend over us like an unexpected wave when we hear a certain song or someone says something that reminds us of our loss. Or simply in our own reverie, the act of remembering people, situations past. Life can be a series of moving from feelings and expressions of, oh no, to God help, to wow. We can swing between feelings of disappointment, helplessness, and gratitude, even on a daily basis, sometimes even on an hourly basis. The psalmist understood this, and the Psalms can make good companions for us during times of grief, reminding us that we can trust that God is holding our lives. In the Psalms of lament, the psalmist generally moves from the pit of despair to a place of praising God and feeling celebration and joy. You might be thinking at different times in your life, I'm just not there yet. I'm still grieving. I still feel like I'm in the pit. Joy may feel a bit elusive, out of reach. We'll be hearing in another moment a reading from Psalm 30. So tonight you will be hearing it twice tonight. Listen to these verses from Psalm 30, verses 3-5. Lord, my God, I cried out for help and you healed me. Lord, you brought me back to life, up from among those going down to the pit. I will give thanks to God's holy name. I will give God thanks and praise forever. Weeping may endure for the night, but joy comes with the morning. In this verse, the psalmist spells morning, morning, that sense that joy comes at daybreak when the sun begins to rise. Later in verse 11, the psalmist declares, you have turned my mourning into dancing. You have taken off my sackcloth and clothed me with joy so that my soul may praise you and not be silent. What if we went back to verse 5 and read it like verse 11? You have turned my mourning, morning, into dancing. Weeping may endure for the night, but joy comes with the morning, not morning necessarily, but joy comes with the morning. This includes the understanding that joy is not about denying suffering, but rather it is about embracing all of life's emotions and holding them in tension with one another. Doing so allows us to eventually experience more joy. Joy is possible when we understand suffering and hold the joy and suffering in tension. Psychotherapist Frances Ward Weller invites us to view grief as a visitor to be welcomed and not shunned. I think a lot of us want to just push it away, to bury it, to put it in a box, put it on a high shelf, wrap it up, not to take it down again. But we are invited to view grief as a visitor, to welcome grief as a visitor. When we feel pain over the loss of loved ones, when we harbor sorrows stemming from the state of the world, the cultural maladies that we inherit, and the misunderstood parts of ourselves, and we wonder, will anyone ever understand who I am? Grief comes in many forms, and when it is not expressed, it tends to harden the once vibrant places in us. Ward writes these words: "The work of a mature person is to carry grief in one hand and gratitude in the other." I invite you to place your hands out before you and imagine that one hand holds grief, and look into your hand and imagine what grief is held in that hand. Breathing in the heaviness and the weight of that. And then look to your other hand and imagine gratitude and thanksgiving is in that hand. And breathe in that place of gratitude. And you can just gently allow your eyes to wander from grief to gratitude, back to grief. The work of the mature person is to carry grief in one hand and gratitude in the other, and to be stretched large by them. How much sorrow can you hold? And I know so many of you are holding so much pain and grief and sorrow. And that is how much gratitude you also hold and that you can give. If you only carry grief, you bend towards cynicism and despair and to the pit, being mired down in the pit. If you only carry gratitude and effervescent joy on the outside, you become saccharine, Weller says, and you are inhibited from developing much compassion for other people's suffering. And so he writes that grief keeps the heart fluid and soft, molding us, which helps make compassion more possible. Our empathy for the weeping of the world is deepened. We can take this message as God's promise that God's healing will come to us, and it may feel like eventually, but that it will come. So we don't come tonight to deny our pain, and we don't even come to completely heal from the wounds of the past or the wounds of today. The grief over whatever loss we are experiencing, loss of a loved one, loss of a job, loss of love and relationship, loss of health, loss of a dream, hopes, expectations, loss of any kind. But instead, we come to acknowledge it and to give thanks for the work that it is doing to carve out the capacity for more love and compassion in our lives, for more empathy, more expression of joy once again. And let us listen now to the words of comfort from scripture and poetry. We are going to be transported to our Blue Christmas service from last year in our sanctuary. And as I look at your faces and your names tonight, I know many of you were with us last year and you might remember. And many of you will recognize the voices of some of our readers. And you can imagine Jeff at the grand piano, underscoring the readings with music from the hymn Star Child, and the chorus of our choir starting to sing. And for our virtual worship service tonight, Neva has placed lovely images in our visuals for us to ponder.